The title of this video for many may seem strange. Some may even consider it erroneous. Reflexively, we in the Western world envision colonization as a process in which various Europeans waved their big guns, defeated Africans, and won the day. However, this is a simplified way of looking at the history of colonialism, as it fails to capture actual historical events. The process of colonialism was far more stratified. It included the process of diplomacy, military engagement, and extensive African participation. Let's talk about what I like to call the Afro-European colonization of Africa. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and contributing to this content. The link to Patreon is in the description box below. Also, stay tuned with a word from my sponsors.
Hello, my name is Howard Dorsey. I'm 54 years old. I'm here to talk about my experience with herbal results. I was getting sick, so I went to the doctor. And they told me that my blood pressure was high, my cholesterol was borderline or high, so I was very sick. You know, sometimes I thought I was dying at some point. And I ordered a bottle of olive leaf extract. This is how the bottle comes in. And within the first probably week and a half, 2 weeks, I checked my blood pressure and it was back down to normal. It was like 120/80. My cholesterol went down to 125. You know, I definitely believe that olive leaf extract from Herbal Results saved my life. And that's real. I mean, I recommend it to everyone in my family, my friends, and we've seen a lot of results in that manner as well.
Purchase now at herbalresults.net.
To begin, the title of the video understandably may be a bit confusing for some, but after studying African history for over a decade, I couldn't help but find a particular pattern over and over again. In the beginning of my journey, I was bemused by the historical record as it concerned colonialism because I engaged the topic with preconceived notions. I know I could not possibly be the only one who had these notions. And so, this video seeks to uncover the nuance of colonial history, a history that has never made its way into popular historical narratives. The purpose of the video is to help you see the same pattern I saw. Now, it's still possible for you to come to a different conclusion, and that's totally fine. But at the very least, I hope this video helps you understand the history from a fuller scope. Let's begin. I think the image of European soldiers coming into Africa, waving their guns and taking over has been ingrained in our minds primarily through historical illustrations or popular culture. This isn't a totally mendacious narrative, however. The problem is that it's only part of the story, and that's why I think it's important that we as Afro-descended people analyze African history for ourselves. To call it the Afro-European colonization of Africa admittedly is a bit liberal. However, a more conservative approach would title it the European-led colonization of Africa. By the end of the video, hopefully you'll understand what I mean. I'll be giving examples from 3 regions: West Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa. Let's start with West Africa. In the 1850s, some local rulers in Nigeria decided to have diplomatic relations with the British because some of them found it difficult to compete with other African groups economically. Beginning in the 1850s, local rulers and British traders in the Bight of Biafra, with its intense economic competition, looked to the British Council to solve disputes. The British seized their opportunity and imposed certain treaties on the local African rulers who were seemingly desperate to gain some advantage over African rivals. So, as we can see from the onset, African ethnic groups were competing against each other economically, causing major conflict. We see firsthand the negative effects of African diversity especially in Nigeria where its density is above average. The British were given the right through diplomacy to control the foreign affairs of local African states in the region. The British then called this region the Niger Coast Protectorate. This protectorate was ancillary to the colonization process, and their military was an African force led by the British. The NCP force is principally composed of Yorubas and has been so for the past 5 years. Judging from the work done in that period, the Yoruba has been found to make as good and efficient a soldier as the Hausa, and they are certainly easier to handle in barrack life and more quickly disciplined. The British-led force was composed mostly of Hausas and Yorubas, and so it begs the question, why would local Africans join the British? The answer is multifaceted. Local Africans joined the British because of the recruitment process, various treaties with kingdoms and city-states in the region, and interestingly enough, various peoples avoiding enslavement by fleeing from more powerful African kingdoms. This was the same for the Royal Niger Constabulary Force, which also consisted of Hausas and Yorubas, and even Fantis from Ghana. The Royal Niger Constabulary eventually turned into the West African Frontier Force. In my opinion, the process of colonization can be distilled into this general format. A European group would attempt to make an African kingdom or city-state a protectorate through diplomacy, and those that refused would be met with military force, a force that consisted largely of African recruits. Many of the stories from colonial resistance stem from powerful African kingdoms who refused to sign treaties with European nations. But we often don't hear about the less powerful African kingdoms or polities that signed treaties without a single shot fired. Some of them requested protectorate status, as mentioned in an earlier example. Those smaller groups were absorbed into British military power, even though they were African. As an example, the powerful kingdom of Benin refused to sign a treaty with the British and were defeated by a mixture of African and European forces. In early 1897, the NCPF joined elements of the Royal Navy to subjugate the major indigenous power in southern Nigeria, the Benin Kingdom. Acknowledging the central role of the Protectorate Force in the successful Benin campaign, a Royal Navy officer wrote, "These troops did a lot of hard work, had a considerable amount of fighting, and reflected much credit on themselves and their officers." This process of local African recruitment and diplomacy was ubiquitous throughout West Africa. Scholar Timothy Stapleton gives us several examples of how a combination of African and European forces conquered powerful African kingdoms such as Nupe, Sokoto, and the Ashanti. At times, the military force would almost be entirely African under European leadership. In fact, this was the case with the Portuguese in Congo. Europeans were remarkably quick to accept African tactics and organization. The Portuguese army in Angola was largely an African force under its own command structure, with Europeans simply serving as leading generals, as documented in Cadernega's detailed description of the Portuguese army that mustered Cavanga in 1646. Moreover, he believed that the Dutch could never hold on to Angola against the Portuguese unless they developed a working relationship with an African army as the Portuguese had. Here's the pattern I was hoping to demonstrate. We see it in West Africa amongst the British, and now we're seeing it amongst the Portuguese in Congo, Central Africa. Other Europeans utilize Nigerian recruits for their own missions. From the 1880s, the German colonial police and military in Cameroon also recruited Hausa men from Nigeria and beyond, and other troops from Dahomey, Togo, the Gold Coast, and Liberia. In East Africa, the British were having a difficult time with the Nandi people of Kenya. Like in West Africa, they continued the process of African recruitment under the Imperial British East Africa Company, This force, composed of around 1,200 Sudanese soldiers, were still not enough to handle the Nandi people. But with further African assistance, the Nandi were finally defeated. In late 1905, a large military expedition of African troops from the recently formed King's African Rifles, along with Maasai and Somali irregulars, finally subdued the Nandi. The irony here is hard to digest. Europeans utilized a Pan-African model to subjugate African people. This pattern of African troops conquering African territory under a European banner is not some aberration. The pattern is clear throughout most of the continent, West, Central, and Eastern Africa. I only gave a few examples here, but there are many more. In my opinion, it seems as though the ethnic groups who were struggling to become economically relevant submitted to European protection to avoid complete dominance by an African rival. This aspect of colonization is seldom discussed. The arrival of Europeans created major opportunities for African peoples who did not acquire the wealth and power of other Africans. And as we can see, one European group, the British, didn't have to push the envelope too hard, as many African rulers invited protectorate status. Now, this video is not saying that Europeans couldn't have colonized the continent without any aid or assistance from Africans. What I am saying is that they thought it important to utilize that strategy. I find it fascinating that Katonega, a 17th century European stationed in Congo, did not believe the Dutch could hold on to Angola without working with local African armies. At the very least, we have one European man in that time keenly aware of the military landscape adopting that opinion. I think that speaks volumes. This is why in many of my videos I discuss the ills of African diversity and how it contributed deeply to the fall of the continent. The how and why Africans were recruited for colonial armies may be diverse region to region, but the end result remains the same. African recruitment and participation was critical for colonial sustainability. This may be why multiple European nations independently utilized the same strategy. And though no one today would call it the Afro-European colonization of Africa, I think given this historical information, we can begin to question our approach to colonial history. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.